You spent 2 years feeding her love, and you couldn't even bother to bake for your own family. My throat closed like I'd swallowed something sharp. The kitchen still smelled like warm sugar and browned butter. My son stood by the counter with a gift in his hands, the kind of careful, handmade thing you don't toss around. A thick scrapbook, heavy pages, a ribbon tied around it like it mattered. He'd walked in smiling, eyes shiny, and for a second I thought it was going to be one of those rare moments where a teenager forgets to be guarded and just lets his mother witness him being happy. He'd opened it in front of me and my daughter like we were the audience to something sweet. There were photos of desserts. So many I felt embarrassed I hadn't realized the number. Cookies stacked in neat towers, loaves of bread with split crusts, a pie with a glossy, perfect top, cupcakes piped with little spirals, even blurry pictures of flour on his cheeks, his hands holding a mixing bowl, his girlfriend in the background grinning like she'd been handed treasure. Every page had a date. Every page had a short paragraph in someone else's handwriting describing what he'd made and what it meant. He looked at me like he wanted me to understand him. "I baked her the 100th one," he said quietly, almost proud. "She counted. She made this." I could see the tears he was trying to hide. My son wasn't the type to cry in front of anyone, not anymore. He kept his emotions locked behind jokes and a phone screen like most boys his age. But here it was, his heart exposed in glue and ink and photographs. And then my daughter, my grown daughter, who still lived like the house was her stage, let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 100, she repeated, stretching the word as if it was disgusting. 100 things for her. My son's shoulders tightened. He kept turning pages anyway, like he could keep it pure if he didn't look up. I reached out to touch a photo of him holding a cake pan, but my daughter slapped the table, hard enough that the scrapbook jumped and the ribbon shifted crooked. "You know what's funny?" she said, looking at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "He's been in this kitchen constantly, flour everywhere, dishes piled up, Mom cleaning it all. And for what? So his little girlfriend can be the only one who gets spoiled." My son's eyes flicked to mine, quick as a flinch. It wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said Mom, like I was a servant she was reporting on, like my life and my labor were background noise to her grievance. I swallowed. I didn't want to ruin the moment. I didn't want to take something tender and turn it into another family argument with slammed doors and wounded silence. But my daughter had already grabbed the wheel. "And you," she said to him finally, "you come in here acting like this is adorable, like this is some big achievement, and you just expect us to clap. Where's our scrapbook? Where's our 100 desserts?" My son blinked. "It wasn't like that." "It is like that," she snapped. "It's exactly like that." My chest ached in that familiar way. Quiet, old, practiced. The ache of watching the people you love compete for love, like it's a limited supply. Like joy is suspicious. Like someone else's happiness is an insult. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Sweetheart, he's 16. He found something he enjoys. He's good at it. That's what?" My daughter cut in. "That's why he treats this girl like a queen and we get nothing?" My son finally looked up, his face flushed. "I bake all the time. I don't even eat it. She likes it." "And we don't?" my daughter said too quickly, as if she'd been waiting years to say it. "Are we not your family?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He held the scrapbook tighter, like the pages might spill their sweetness onto the floor and get trampled. I watched him, and a small memory flashed. His hands tiny, sticky with batter when he was little, standing on a chair so he could reach the counter. He used to want to help me with everything. He used to look at me like I was the safest place on earth. Now he looked like a boy being dragged into court. My daughter's voice sharpened, aimed not just at him anymore. "Mom, don't even pretend you haven't noticed. He's always baking, always experimenting, and somehow the only person who benefits is her." I felt heat climb my neck, not rage, something worse, humiliation. like I was being accused of failing at my own kitchen table. "I didn't realize it was a competition," I said, keeping my hands flat against the counter so they wouldn't tremble. My daughter leaned in, eyes narrow. "It's not a competition, Mom. It's basic respect." That word hit wrong. Respect. Like my son had committed a betrayal. He wasn't out doing drugs. He wasn't getting into fights. He wasn't failing classes. He was baking. He was creating something with his hands, something soft and harmless and surprisingly disciplined. And here we were, turning it into proof that he didn't love us. My son's jaw tightened. "I didn't say I don't love you." "But you show her," my daughter said, pointing at the scrapbook like it was evidence of a crime. "You show her. You show her constantly." I looked at the photos again, the frosting, the flower, the dates. I saw my son's face in every picture, different versions of him over 2 years, younger, then taller, then a little more confident. It wasn't just dessert, it was time, effort, a boy learning how to care for someone in a way that felt safe for him. And I realized, with a cold little drop in my stomach, that my daughter wasn't really angry at him. She was angry at what the scrapbook proved. That love could be given freely, that it could be recorded and celebrated, that someone else had seen my son's effort and treasured it enough to hold on to every single piece. My daughter's fingers slid across the cover of the scrapbook, possessive, as if she could claim it by touching it. "So," she said, slow and cruel, "are we supposed to beg next time? Or is baking only for girls you're trying to impress?" My son flinched. I saw it. Just a flicker. But it was there. And in that flicker, I knew this wasn't about cake at all. It was about control. And my daughter had just decided, right here in my kitchen, that she was going to punish him for having a heart that belonged partly to someone else. The next morning, the kitchen felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in overnight. I was rinsing a mug at the sink when my daughter walked in, already dressed, already tight with purpose. She didn't greet me. She went straight to the counter where my son usually left his mixing bowls to dry. They were clean, stacked neatly, a dusting of flour still clinging to the rim of one bowl like a ghost. She picked it up, turned it once in her hands, then set it down harder than necessary. "So," she said, finally looking at me, "is he baking today?" I kept my eyes on the water. "I don't know." She made a sound through her nose, not quite a scoff, not quite a sigh. "Figures." The house had that early morning quiet where every sound travels too far. The hum of the fridge, the click of the clock, my own breathing sounding louder than it should. My daughter leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like she was waiting for me to confess something. "You know," she said, "people are starting to notice." I shut off the tap. "Notice what?" "That he never does anything for us." She tilted her head. "I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, Mom." There it was. Social shame. Soft, poisonous, delivered like concern. I dried my hands slowly. "Who is people?" She shrugged. "Family, friends. I mentioned it to Aunt Carol, actually, just casually. And she said it was strange, too." My stomach tightened. I pictured my sister's pursed lips, the way she nodded when she disapproved of something but didn't want to argue. I hadn't even known this was being discussed outside our walls. My daughter pushed off the counter and walked toward the pantry, opening it without asking. She scanned the shelves, then glanced back at me. "Look at this," she said. "Sugar, vanilla, cocoa powder, all this stuff we buy, and somehow it all turns into gifts for her." I heard the accusation beneath the words. "You fund this. You allow this." "He buys his own ingredients sometimes," I said, though my voice sounded thin even to me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes." That afternoon, my son came home later than usual. I heard the door open and close, his footsteps hesitant like he was testing whether the house was safe. He paused in the doorway to the kitchen when he saw us both there. "Hey," he said. My daughter didn't answer. She was scrolling on her phone, thumb flicking fast, exaggeratedly uninterested. He looked at me instead. I was thinking of baking tonight. Silence. Heavy, deliberate. My daughter didn't look up. Of course you are. He shifted his weight. There's this new recipe. It's not even dessert. It's bread. She laughed softly. Wow, how generous. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? She finally raised her eyes. It means you suddenly want credit for doing something normal. His face flushed. I didn't say that. No, you don't say things, she replied. You just do whatever you want and let Mom clean up after you. That wasn't true, and we all knew it. But lies don't need truth to land. He looked at me again, something pleading in his eyes. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would steady him. Instead, my daughter stepped between us, physically, casually, like it was nothing. Maybe, she said, if you actually baked for your family once in a while, this wouldn't feel so weird. I have baked for you, he said, his voice tight. When? She shot back. Name something, recently. He opened his mouth, closed it. I could almost see him scrolling through his memory, trying to defend himself with dates and facts the way the scrapbook did for his girlfriend. I made cookies last month, he said finally. She snorted. For her. For everyone, he said louder now. You ate them. That doesn't count. Why not? Because you didn't make them for us, she said, as if that distinction was obvious. You just let us have leftovers. The word leftovers landed like a slap. I felt something in me shrink, not break, shrink. The old instinct to keep the peace crawled up my spine, telling me to soften this, smooth it over, make it no one's fault. I started. My daughter cut me off without even looking. No, Mom, don't. My son's shoulders sagged. I didn't know baking was a problem. It wasn't, she said, until you made it obvious who matters more. He stared at her. That's not fair. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping. Life isn't fair. You should know that by now. That night, he didn't bake. He went to his room instead, door closed, music low enough that it felt like an apology. The kitchen stayed clean. Too clean. The counters bare, the bowls untouched. It felt wrong, like a church after everyone's left. At dinner, my daughter made sure to mention, loudly, how nice it would be to have something homemade once in a while. She said it with a smile, but she never looked at him when she did. He ate quickly, eyes down, fork scraping his plate. Afterward, I found the scrapbook tucked halfway under his arm as he passed through the living room, like he was hiding it from the house itself. Don't let her get to you, I said softly. He paused. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I know. She made it sound like I chose wrong, he whispered. I wanted to tell him that loving someone wasn't a zero-sum game, that affection could expand without stealing from anyone else. But the words stuck. Because my daughter was watching us from the hallway, her reflection faint in the mirror, her face unreadable. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to see before. This wasn't going to pass on its own. I learned how to stretch things early, not just money, everything. Time, energy, silence. I learned it the way most women of my generation did, without anyone naming it as a skill. You just watched your mother do it and then one day realized your hands were moving the same way hers had. My first job was at a dry cleaner on the edge of town. I was 17, still smelling like cheap soap and bus exhaust, standing behind a counter that was always faintly warm from the pressing machines. I remember the weight of the metal hanger rod when I pulled it forward, the squeak it made, the way steam fogged the backroom windows until the world outside disappeared. My paycheck came in a thin white envelope every Friday, the paper already creased by the time it reached my hands. I kept those envelopes in a shoebox under my bed. I didn't spend much. I learned to fold dollar bills flat, to stack them evenly. When the box filled up, I felt safer, even if the amount inside wouldn't have impressed anyone else. Later, when I married my son's father, the habits followed me into a different house, a different kitchen. The countertops were chipped laminate, pale yellow, already worn by other people's lives. We bought the place cheap because it needed work. We told ourselves we'd fix it slowly. We did, but not in the way people imagine. We patched, not replaced. We adjusted, not upgraded. There was a blue ledger notebook I kept in the second drawer from the left, underneath the utensils. It wasn't pretty. The cover bent easily, the corners soft from being handled too much. Every month I wrote down what came in and what went out. Rent, electric, gas, groceries. I used pencil because things changed. Pencil meant forgiveness. When my daughter was born, I added a new column. Diapers, formula, doctor visits. When my son came along years later, I didn't need a new column. I already knew where the money would come from. It would come from me. I worked 2 jobs for a while, days at the clinic filing records, evenings cleaning offices downtown. The office building smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. I learned the sound of vacuum lines snapping into place, the way fluorescent lights buzzed after hours, harsher somehow, without people beneath them. I wiped down desks that held other people's ambitions, other people's certainties. At home, I cooked what stretched: beans, rice, soup that lasted 2 days if you didn't take too much the first night. I learned how to save bacon grease in a jar, how to reuse it until it turned cloudy. I learned which grocery store discounted bread on Thursdays, which cashier would quietly ring something cheaper if she recognized the look in your eyes. My son grew up in that kitchen, climbing onto chairs, then counters, his hands curious. He liked the sound of mixing, wooden spoon against bowl. I let him help when it didn't slow me down too much. There's a photo somewhere of him with flour on his nose, smiling like he'd discovered something secret. I didn't think of it as talent. I thought of it as keeping him close. My daughter was different. She watched, measured. She learned early how to ask for what she wanted in a way that made you feel selfish for hesitating. She learned tone, timing. She learned how to take up space. I don't say that to blame her. Children absorb the air they breathe. When my marriage began to fray, it did so quietly. No shouting, no broken dishes, just absence. My husband stayed later at work. Conversations shortened. When he finally left, it was with a suitcase and a sentence that tried to sound gentle. "I think you're stronger than you realize," he said, as if that excused what he was doing. I didn't cry until after the door closed. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the blue ledger open and recalculated everything. Strength became a requirement, not a compliment. Years passed. The kids grew. My daughter took on the role of second adult easily. Too easily. She knew where things were. She knew how to speak for me in public. At school meetings, she'd answer questions before I could. People smiled at her confidence. They assumed I was grateful. Sometimes I was. Sometimes I felt myself fading at the edges. The ledger notebook stayed with me. So did the habit of keeping receipts folded into its pages, proof of responsibility, proof that I was holding things together. When my son hit his teenage years, something shifted. He became quieter, more inward, not troubled, just focused. He started baking the way other boys his age started lifting weights or disappearing into video games. Flour replaced dirt under his nails. Timers replaced curfews. At first I worried about the mess, about the cost of ingredients. Butter isn't cheap when you're watching every dollar. Neither is vanilla extract. I caught myself checking the pantry more often, calculating. But then I saw what it did for him. How he stood straighter when something came out right. How he paid attention to temperatures, to timing, to instructions. How he accepted failure without rage when a loaf collapsed or a cake sank. I recognized the discipline, the quiet persistence. It felt familiar. I found myself buying extra flour on sale, slipping it into the cart like a small secret. I didn't announce it. I didn't praise him loudly. I just made room. My daughter noticed, of course. She always did. She started making comments then, not sharp at first, casual. "He's really into that baking thing, huh? That's a lot of time in the kitchen." I brushed them off. I told myself it was sibling adjustment. Jealousy burns differently depending on age. But the comments lingered. They accumulated. One night, after my son had gone to bed, I found my daughter flipping through the blue ledger notebook at the table. She hadn't asked. She didn't need to. She tapped a page with her finger. "We spend a lot on groceries," she said. "We always have," I replied. She hummed like she was considering something. "Just saying, maybe it's time to set limits." Limits. The word echoed longer than it should have. I closed the notebook and slid it back into its drawer. "I have it handled." She looked at me then, really looked. There was something assessing in her eyes. "Okay," she said, "if you say so." I didn't know then that the ledger had become more than numbers to her, that it had become a way to measure fairness or power. The scrapbook came much later, but the fault lines were already there. I think back to those early days sometimes, to the dry cleaner, the shoebox of envelopes, the blue notebook softening at the corners. I think about how often I taught my children that love was something you showed by doing, by providing, by staying. I never taught them what happens when love starts to be counted. And now, watching the space between them widen, I can feel those old habits pressing in on me again, the urge to smooth, to stretch, to make it work no matter what it costs. What I didn't realize then was that the same instincts that kept us alive were about to be used against us. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part people misunderstand when they ask later why you didn't stop it sooner. It happened in small adjustments, small permissions, small moments where silence felt safer than resistance. The first shift was practical. My daughter began rearranging the kitchen without asking. Bowls moved to higher shelves. Measuring cups disappeared into a drawer I didn't use. The blue ledger notebook didn't go missing, but it was no longer where I left it. I'd find it on the counter, open to a page I hadn't intended to show anyone. A receipt smoothed flat as if it had been examined. "Just organizing," she said lightly when I noticed. "You're always saying your back hurts." I didn't argue. I told myself it was helpful, that I should be grateful. My son tried to bake again the following weekend. He waited until mid-morning, when the light in the kitchen was still soft, when the house usually felt neutral. He pulled out flour, set his phone timer, tied an apron around his waist like he was bracing himself. My daughter stood in the doorway, watching. "That's a lot of butter," she said, glancing at the recipe. "Do you even know how expensive that is now?" He hesitated, fingers still on the wrapper. "It's just one stick." She shrugged. "I'm just saying, Mom's been stressed about money." I hadn't said that. Not to him. Not recently. He looked at me, uncertain. I opened my mouth to correct her and didn't. The words stalled somewhere behind my teeth. He unwrapped the butter anyway, slower now. The confidence drained from his movements like air from a balloon. When the bread finally went into the oven, the kitchen smelled familiar, comforting. Yeast. Warmth. The kind of smell that makes a house feel inhabited. My son leaned against the counter, watching the timer, shoulders relaxing by degrees. My daughter picked up her phone. "I told Aunt Carol you were baking again," she said casually. "She thinks it's interesting." My son stiffened. "Why would you tell her?" She smiled without warmth. "Because it's family news. Don't be so sensitive." Silence followed. Thick, heavy. No one moved for a moment. The oven hummed on. That silence pressed on my chest until my breathing felt shallow. I wanted to say something, anything to break it. Instead, I wiped an already clean section of counter, my hands moving on their own. The bread came out uneven, the crust too dark on one side. My son stared at it longer than necessary, then turned it on the rack, like maybe that would fix how it looked. "It's fine," he said too quickly. My daughter picked at a corner once it cooled. She chewed, slow, thoughtful. "It's okay," she said. "Not great, but okay." He nodded, like he'd expected worse. That night, she made a point of leaving the loaf uncovered on the counter. By morning, it was stale. Another adjustment followed a week later. I came home from the grocery store to find the pantry half empty, not gone, relocated. Boxes of baking supplies sat in a plastic bin in the laundry room. Temporary, my daughter said when I asked. We need to control the mess. The laundry room was colder, dimmer. The light flickered when you turned it on. My son stood there later, hands in his pockets, looking at the bin like it didn't belong to him anymore. It's fine, he said when he caught me watching. I can bake less. Less. The word echoed the way limits had before. At dinner, my daughter began narrating. Not loudly, just enough. He's been baking again, she told my cousin when she stopped by one evening. I keep telling him it's excessive. My cousin laughed awkwardly. Well, at least he's not out causing trouble. True, my daughter said, though sometimes it feels like he forgets who his real family is. The table went quiet. My son's fork paused midair. He didn't look up. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Shame this time. Public, exposed. The overhead light seemed harsher suddenly, flattening everything. He's just enjoying a hobby, I said, too late. My daughter tilted her head. I didn't say he wasn't allowed to enjoy things. I said balance matters. Balance. Another reasonable word, sharpened just enough to cut. After that, she started correcting him in front of people. Small things. Don't leave that there. You forgot to clean the bowl. You're really going to bake again? Each comment landed with a pause afterward, a silence where he waited to see if I'd intervene. I didn't. My body reacted before my mind did. My hands shook once when I reached for a glass. I steadied them against the table until the tremor passed. The ledger notebook became a weapon. I'd find it open to ingredient totals, numbers circled in pen this time. We can't afford this, my daughter said one afternoon, tapping the page. I don't know why you're indulging it. It's not that much, I said quietly. She leaned back in her chair. You always say that, and then something breaks, or a bill goes up. Her voice was calm, reasonable, the kind that made you doubt yourself. I started apologizing, not out loud, internally, for being tired, for being slow, for not managing better. One evening, I came into the kitchen to find my son scrubbing the counter again, hard, over and over. You already cleaned, I said. I know, he replied, not stopping. I just want it to look right. My daughter watched from the doorway. See, she said to me, he gets it. He knows it's been too much. My son froze. The sponge dripped onto the floor. I didn't say that, he said. She smiled gently. You don't have to. The silence that followed felt endless. My throat tightened. I couldn't swallow. That night, he didn't eat dessert. Not because there wasn't any, because he'd baked muffins earlier that day, quietly in the laundry room, like someone doing something forbidden. He wrapped them carefully, then left them untouched. I found one the next morning, cold, still perfect. I held it too long before throwing it away. The lowest moment came without drama. I came home to find my daughter sitting at the kitchen table with a friend of hers, papers spread out, the ledger notebook open. My son stood by the fridge, arms crossed over his chest like he was holding himself together. We were just talking, my daughter said brightly, about how some kids use hobbies to avoid responsibility. Her friend nodded. Yeah, my brother did that. It's like a phase. My son's face went pale. You didn't have to say that. My daughter shrugged. It's not a secret. I stood there, grocery bags digging into my fingers, unable to step forward. The room felt too bright, too exposed. My son walked past me without looking up and shut himself in his room. Later, I stood in the kitchen alone, the silence pressing down, heavier than noise ever was. The blue ledger lay open on the table, its pencil marks smudged, pages worn thin from years of holding our life together. For the first time, I understood that what was happening wasn't just sibling tension or misplaced concern. It was erosion, and I was standing still while something precious was being worn away, grain by grain. The moment didn't announce itself. There was no shouting, no slammed door to mark it. It came quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that usually passed without leaving a mark. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard a sound from the kitchen that didn't belong. Glass skidding across tile followed by a sharp crack. Not a shatter, just enough to make your heart jump. I stood still for a second, listening. Then I heard my son's voice, not raised, not angry, just thin. I was going to clean it. I moved toward the kitchen. My daughter was already there, standing over him. A measuring cup lay on its side near his feet, a thin line of milk spreading slowly, like it was thinking about where to go. She didn't look at the spill. She looked at him. "That's not the point," she said. "The point is, you're careless." "I just bumped it," he replied. "It happens." She crossed her arms. "It happens a lot." I saw his hands then. They were shaking. Not dramatically, just enough that he pressed them together, fingers locking like he was trying to keep them still by force. "I'll clean it," he said again. "I said that's not the point," she repeated, sharper now. "You're always in the way, always making messes, always acting like this kitchen belongs to you." The words landed wrong, too heavy for the moment, too absolute. I stepped forward. "That's enough." Both of them looked at me, startled. My voice hadn't been loud, but it was different, firmer, less practiced. My daughter blinked. "Mom, I wasn't yelling." "I didn't say you were." She gestured at the spill. "I'm just trying to teach him accountability." My son let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for weeks. "I know how to clean," he said quietly. "I'm not a child." My daughter laughed once, short, then stopped acting like one. Something inside me shifted, not exploded, shifted, like a heavy piece sliding into place after being misaligned for too long. I looked at the milk creeping toward the baseboard. I looked at the measuring cup, his, scratched from use, the numbers faded. I looked at my son's face, tight with effort, like he was bracing for impact that had already become routine. And I saw, suddenly and unmistakably, what I had been teaching him without meaning to, that his care was a nuisance, that his joy was negotiable, that love could be audited. "Go to your room," my daughter said to him. The words hit me harder than the spill. He stared at her. "You're not my parent." "No," she said calmly, "but someone has to act like one." Silence snapped into place, sharp, cutting. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I might not be able to breathe. The room felt too small, the overhead light too bright, the sound of the refrigerator too loud. "Stop," I said. My daughter turned to me, irritation flashing across her face. "Why are you undermining me?" That was the moment, the exact moment. Undermining. As if she had authority to be undermined, as if I had already handed it over. "No," I said. My voice trembled, but I didn't soften it. "You don't get to send him anywhere." She stared at me, surprised, truly surprised. "Mom, he didn't do anything wrong." She scoffed. "He spilled milk." "He spilled milk," I repeated, "and you spoke to him like he'd committed some moral failure." My son didn't move. He watched us, eyes wide, like he was witnessing something fragile. My daughter shook her head. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." The word felt strange in my mouth, heavy, necessary. She laughed again, but this time it sounded brittle. "So now I'm the bad guy?" I didn't answer right away. I bent down and wiped the milk with a towel, slow and deliberate. I wanted my hands to do something grounded while my heart raced. When I stood, I met her eyes. "You've been treating him like a problem to manage instead of a person." Her jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect this family." "From what?" I asked. She opened her mouth and closed it. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, exposing. My son shifted behind me. I felt his presence like a weight between my shoulder blades. "I'm just baking," he said, barely audible. My daughter looked at him then, really looked, and something flickered across her face. Annoyance, or fear, or the realization that she'd pushed too far. She straightened. "Fine," she said. "If you want to let him do whatever he wants, that's on you." She walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps sharp, deliberate. The door to her room closed a moment later, not slammed, but firm. The house went quiet again, but it was a different quiet. Charged, waiting. My son exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For causing problems." The words cut deeper than anything my daughter had said. I looked at him, at the careful way he held himself, like he was always prepared to shrink if necessary, and something inside me hardened. "This isn't your fault," I said. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully believe me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. The blue ledger notebook lay open in front of me, pencil marks, erased lines, years of proof that I had carried us. I ran my finger along the edge of the page and felt how thin it had become. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to adjust the numbers or justify them. I felt something else instead. Clarity. And with it, a quiet, steady resolve that I was done letting my silence teach lessons I didn't agree with. Because the next step wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about choosing. I didn't announce anything. I didn't warn her. I didn't make speeches. I started paying attention. The first thing I did was move the ledger notebook, not dramatically, just out of the kitchen drawer and into my bedroom, tucked beneath folded sweaters. I sharpened a pencil and rewrote the last 3 months carefully, checking receipts, adding dates. I wanted my numbers clean, undeniable. I circled nothing this time. Circles invited argument. I began keeping copies. Grocery receipts went into a manila envelope. Butter, flour, sugar. I wrote the prices in the margins, small and neat. I compared them to everything else. Takeout containers, delivery fees, impulse purchases my daughter made without discussion. I didn't confront her with any of it. I just let the paper accumulate. At night, after the house went quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and wrote notes, not feelings, facts, dates, words she used, who was present, where I was standing. I kept my handwriting steady even when my chest felt tight. The act of writing grounded me. It turned fog into lines. I watched how my son moved now. He stayed small, careful. He waited until my daughter wasn't home to step into the kitchen. When he did bake, he cleaned obsessively, wiping counters twice, drying bowls until they squeaked. He wrapped whatever he made and carried it to his room like contraband. I didn't tell him what I was doing. Not yet. I needed him to feel safe before I asked him to trust me. I spoke to his girlfriend's mother one afternoon, casually over the phone. We'd known each other in passing for years, school events, pickup lines. I didn't accuse. I didn't dramatize. I asked simple questions. "How often does he bring things over?" "Oh, often," she said warmly. "He's very considerate." "Does he ever seem pressured?" She paused. "No. He seems proud. He lights up when he hands something over." I wrote that down afterward. Not her opinion, her words. I called my sister next, not Aunt Carol, another one, the one who listened more than she spoke. "I think something's off at home," I said. She didn't interrupt. I told her about the comments, the control, the way authority had quietly shifted. "She's always been strong-willed," my sister said carefully. "So have I replied. That earned a small silence on the line, a thoughtful one. "Do you need me to come by?" she asked. "Not yet." I didn't want witnesses. Not yet. I wanted clarity. I spoke to the school counselor, framing it as concern, not crisis. I asked about support, about boundaries, about what was appropriate for siblings and what wasn't. She didn't hesitate. "What you're describing," she said, "is role confusion, and it can be damaging." I wrote that down too. Not the term, the consequences she listed. At home, I made one small change. I started answering before my daughter could. If my son asked a question at dinner, I responded directly. If she interrupted, I held up my hand, calm, steady. I've got this. The first time I did it, her eyes flashed. She didn't argue. She smiled tightly and went quiet. Silence, I was learning, could be used both ways. I reorganized the pantry myself. I brought the baking supplies back into the kitchen, placing them on a low shelf where my son could reach them easily. I didn't ask permission. I didn't explain. My daughter noticed. She stood there, arms crossed, watching. "Did you move these?" she asked. "Yes." She waited. I kept arranging cans. "We talked about this," she said. "No," I replied. "You talked. I listened." Her mouth opened, closed. I felt my heart pounding, but my voice stayed level. "This is my house." She stared at me, something calculating behind her eyes. "Okay," she said finally, "if that's how you want it." Her tone was light. Too light. I wrote that down later. I asked my son to sit with me one evening, just the two of us. I didn't bring up baking. I asked about school, about his plans. I listened. When he finally mentioned the kitchen, it came out hesitant. "I can stop," he said, "and it's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," I replied. "To you." He looked at me then, searching. "You're not doing anything wrong," I said, "and I should have said that sooner." His shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief, permission. I asked him one question carefully. "Has anyone told you you were selfish for baking?" He hesitated, then nodded. I didn't ask who. I already knew. That night, I gathered everything, the notes, the receipts, the dates. I placed them in the manila envelope and slid it into my bag. I didn't know yet where the conversation would happen, only that it couldn't be in whispers anymore. The next morning, my daughter announced she'd invited people over for dinner. Family, casual, no warning. I smiled and nodded. That's fine. Inside, my pulse quickened, not with fear but recognition. She was confident, comfortable, certain of the ground beneath her feet. She didn't know I'd already been measuring it for cracks. As I set the table later that evening, I placed the ledger notebook at my seat. Not hidden, not open, just there. My daughter noticed it immediately. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes did. The house filled slowly, the way it always did when my daughter played host. Voices layered over one another, shoes by the door, the clink of glasses, warm light from the dining room chandelier pooling over the table, flattering, forgiving. She moved through it all with ease, greeting relatives, laughing at the right moments. Touching shoulders like reassurance was something she dispensed naturally. I stayed quieter, observing, waiting. My son arrived last, slipping in behind his aunt, shoulders drawn in, eyes scanning the room the way they had learned to do. He caught sight of the ledger notebook at my place setting and paused just for a second. I gave him a small nod. Nothing more. Dinner began, as it always did. Small talk, complaints about traffic, someone mentioning how tall my son had gotten. My daughter poured wine, careful not to fill my glass too much, like she was still managing something. Halfway through the meal, as plates were cleared, she smiled brightly and leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, loud enough for the table, "since everyone's here, there's something I think we should talk about." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Forks stilled. I didn't move. "It's about responsibility," she continued, "and balance, especially with teenagers." My son's shoulders tensed. I felt it from across the table. She glanced at him, then back to the others. "Some kids get so wrapped up in hobbies that they forget their priorities. Family, contribution. It puts pressure on everyone else." A few heads nodded, not in agreement, just in reflex. She turned to me, smiled gentle. "You know what I mean, Mom." I set my napkin down carefully. "I do," I said. Her smile widened, relieved. "Good. I just think it's important we're honest." Silence settled, the kind that waits. I reached into my bag and took out the manila envelope. I didn't rush. I laid it on the table and slid it toward the center, next to the salt. My daughter's smile faltered. just slightly. I agree, I said. Honesty matters. She laughed lightly. Okay. I opened the envelope and took out the first stack of receipts. I didn't hold them up. I placed them flat on the table, one by one. Groceries from the last 3 months, I said, separated by category. Someone cleared their throat. My daughter leaned forward. Mom, what are you doing? I met her eyes. Let me finish. That alone was enough to still the room. I pointed to the first group. Baking supplies, flour, sugar, butter, cocoa, total cost. I slid a small note forward with the number written neatly. Then the second group. Takeout, coffee deliveries, late-night orders. Another number, larger. A murmur rippled around the table. My daughter's face flushed. That's not fair. Those aren't... I haven't compared them yet, I said evenly. I'm just laying them out. I turned to my sister. You asked once if we were struggling. We aren't. We've been careful. The costs here, I tapped the baking receipts, are modest, predictable. The mess has been manageable. The dishes cleaned. I looked back at my daughter. The pressure you've been describing doesn't come from this. Her jaw tightened. You're embarrassing me. I nodded. I know. The room went very still. I reached for the ledger notebook and opened it, flipping to a marked page. Pencil. Clean lines. I also started keeping notes, I said. Dates, words, situations. My daughter pushed back slightly from the table. This is ridiculous. I didn't look at her. I looked at my son. Do you remember the night the bread went stale on the counter? I asked him. He hesitated, then nodded. Do you remember being told you were careless for spilling milk? His eyes flicked to my daughter, then back to me. Yes. I turned back to the table. I do too. My daughter stood abruptly. This is an ambush. No, I said. This is clarity. She laughed, sharp and humorless. You're choosing him over me. I felt the words land, heavy, familiar. I'm choosing truth, I replied, and boundaries. Her face twisted. So now I'm the villain. No one spoke. I leaned forward. You've been acting as if you have authority over your brother, over my home. You've spoken for me, managed for me, corrected him in public, used money as a weapon, silence as a threat. She shook her head. I was helping. Help doesn't make someone smaller, I said quietly. She looked around the table, searching for backup. None came. My son sat frozen, hands clasped, eyes shining. I turned to him. You bake because you love it, because you're good at it, because it makes you feel capable. He swallowed. You are not selfish, I said. You are not careless, and you are not responsible for anyone else's resentment. Something shifted in the room. I felt it, like air being let in after a long time sealed. My daughter's voice rose. So what? I'm just supposed to shut up? No, I said. You're supposed to step back. She stared at me, disbelief giving way to something raw. You're taking this away from me. I held her gaze. You took it first. The words landed hard. Someone gasped softly. My daughter's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked to the ledger, to the receipts, to the faces around the table. For the first time, she looked unsure. I closed the notebook gently. From now on, I manage this house. I speak for myself, and you do not discipline your brother. The silence that followed was absolute. My daughter sank back into her chair, color draining from her face, her confidence unraveling in real time as the room watched, waiting to see what she would do next. The house felt different the morning after, not lighter, quieter in a way that didn't press on my chest, the kind of quiet that lets you hear yourself think without flinching. My daughter stayed in her room most of that day. I didn't knock, I didn't pursue. Boundaries I was learning didn't need speeches to hold their shape. They just needed consistency. My son came into the kitchen mid-morning, tentative, like someone entering a space that used to hurt. He stopped when he saw the baking supplies on the counter. Flour, sugar, the measuring cups returned to their place. Nothing dramatic, just present. "Is it okay if I bake?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It is." That was all. No qualifiers, no warnings. He washed his hands and moved slowly at first, then with more confidence as the familiar rhythm returned. Bowl, spoon, timer. The oven warming, its low hum steady. The smell crept back into the room, gentle and warm, not triumphant, just normal. My daughter passed through once, eyes flicking toward the counter. She said nothing. Silence this time didn't bruise. It rested. Later that week, we talked, not as an event, as a series of short conversations that didn't spiral. I told her I loved her. I told her I wasn't giving up my authority again. I told her that care didn't mean control. She listened, sometimes stiffly, sometimes with her arms crossed, sometimes with tears she wiped away too quickly. She didn't apologize right away. That came later, quieter, without witnesses. I didn't demand it. I accepted it when it arrived. Life didn't reset, it adjusted. My son baked openly again, sometimes for his girlfriend, sometimes for the house, sometimes just to practice. No tally, no commentary. When relatives asked, I answered simply, "He enjoys it." The ledger notebook stayed in my room, not because it was a secret, but because it no longer needed to defend me. I still wrote in it out of habit, out of care, but the pages felt different, lighter, less urgent. Pencil marks no longer pressed into the paper like they were trying to prove something. One afternoon, my son brought a loaf to the table and sliced it without ceremony. He buttered a piece and set it in front of me. "For you," he said. Not because he was proving anything, just because he wanted to. I took a bite. It was good, not perfect. Honest. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The house breathed around me, pipes settling, the faint tick of cooling metal. I brought the ledger notebook out and set it in front of me, running my hand along its worn edge. For years, it had meant survival, calculation, endurance. Now it meant something else. Choice. If my story stayed with you, maybe it's because you recognize that quiet moment, the one where you realize something you've been carrying no longer belongs to you in the same way. I'd like to know if you've had one of those too. Sometimes sharing the weight is how we finally set it down.